Gurmíl Magat Ahishig, and thank you all for your attention and engagement thus far. This, as I said earlier on, is the first in our series of the podcast discussions, Céad Blian, which will look at the story of Fianna Fáil. So, Anna Gwyl sé Anishla Tafada Oscor Lucht Fekina at all Insta Shomra. So delighted you're all here to witness this first of our podcast discussions, which will be available on Fridays. And just the reason we made that available is we know that our members around the country who are interested in our story, who might be able to travel to events for certain reasons. So this is an attempt to include them in that. Just so you're aware, we still have members of the media in the room with us. They won't be engaging in the podcast, but just so that we're aware of that. So let me, first of all, introduce the Taoiseach, who will be participating in our podcast. But also, we're particularly delighted to be joined by Professor Anne Dolan, who is Professor of Modern Irish History at Trinity College Dublin. I think it's fair to say one of the leading experts on Irish politics, Irish history, certainly in the 1920s and around the foundation period of the state. So you might give her a welcome to join us this evening. Professor Dolan, I'm going to go to you first, and I want you to... We've heard a lot tonight about the fact that we're 100 years now as a party, but bring us back to Ireland of the 1920s. Give us the context at the time, the public mood, the political landscape, the upheaval that had occurred. But just bring us back to that scene. We're here in this fantastic venue. Maybe we can travel back there with you now.
Not an easy task to begin. I suppose it's interesting to think about... The easy thing is to see this as a Civil War party, as you mentioned. So many people have talked about this is about Civil War politics. We've lived through over 100 years of Civil War politics. I think you're absolutely right. We need to complicate this. I think in some ways we need to take it a little further back, because the new state that you get in 1922 is one that has been, in some ways, I think, shaped by events that we didn't really mark during the recent centenaries. I think we probably didn't pay enough attention to something like the Local Government Act of 1898, for example. The degree to which you get new people brought into politics in a new way. You spread out where politics matters, how it functions. You get women involved in local government for the first time. You get, if you like, the franchise expanding, people active locally in their own localities thinking about politics in a new way. That's feeding into what happens in 16, 18, 19, 21, etc. I think the change in the franchise, again, we heard a lot in, I suppose, 2018 about the expansion of the franchise to include women, but it also is a huge expansion of the franchise to include large numbers of working people who couldn't have had the vote before that. So, if you like, the new state is encountering, I suppose, a political landscape that has changed in terms of who can actually vote. I think that's something deeply in the consciousness of any political party that is starting out. In a way, that's where Sinn Féin, as it was after the treaty, isn't really thinking about that hard enough, and that's where you get that unease among De Valera and others that something else needs to happen here. I was really struck thinking about, even just coming here today, like looking as early as, I think it's July 23, De Valera writes to Count Plunkett before he's arrested in August 23 at the election campaign. And if you have to remember, August 23 election is the first election where every single seat in the state is going to be contested. If you like, the Irish Parliamentary Party often had uncontested seats. You had the packed election in 22. So this is the first time every single seat's going to be fought for. And most of Sinn Féin's candidates are either in jail, they're on the run, they can't address their electorate, but nonetheless they win, 44 seats. 27, I think, % of the popular vote. But a month before that vote is taken, De Valera is already saying, listen, there's a government here. They're letting us contest elections. We have to get inside this. This is no longer about an alien parliament over in London. Abstentionism is not going to work anymore. And he's seeing that a month before that election. He obviously ends up in prison. So you're coming at a point where, after the Civil War, you've a cohort of people who, in a way, what is their place now? Those anti-treatyites, if you like, what is their place in the political spectrum? Many of them are disillusioned with politics. How do you get those people engaged again? Equally, you've big problems in terms of economic problems, you've enormous challenges in terms of emigration. We don't know how many people are actually leaving the country through the 20s because the statistics aren't good enough. You've got, I suppose, real need to address those things. As you say, to move beyond whether you were for or against a treaty. Because in a way, you're faced in a way with the treaty with this very key moment, important moment that's debated in the Dáil. This document has to be debated. You're either for it or against it. But you're also faced right across the state with what did all those big words mean? What was independence supposed to be about? What's freedom about? And people are asking that and thinking about that in every household across the state. And it begs the question, well, what were their expectations? So you have a very interesting period in terms of how do you work out what are people's political expectations? What are they expecting of independence? Whether they agree with the treaty or they don't agree with the treaty. What are they expecting of this thing? How are you going to fulfil those expectations? And I think to some extent, the anti-treaty people had the luxury of figuring that out for themselves because they too had to go through that process outside of the Dáil without the pressure of actually running the country. I think to some extent you have to cut Cumann na Gael a bit of slack. They did have to figure that out while actually running the thing, keeping the lights on, keeping things going, whatever you think of their policies in government. But it's in that sense, it's an incredibly difficult political landscape to start a new government.
And then Taoiseach, I suppose Professor Dolan has referred to the political landscape there as well. I think the other part that a lot of politicians in the room would know about the importance of political discourse. So obviously you have all the external factors you described, Professor Dolan. You have the structural changes that have happened to the political system over time. You have a situation where, a party system is embedding itself. You mentioned propaganda in your speech and the kind of the propaganda efforts that were made against certain members of the party. That continued through the 20s. Talk to us maybe about the political discourse of that 1920s and how that set the tone for a lot of the discussions that were happening.
Well, I think I will agree 100% with Anne. I think sometimes I've made this point myself in my own research in the evolution of politics in Cork, but the franchise was very fundamental. You have a very expanded franchise in 1918, and you see the manifestation of the local government reform in the 1920 local elections, which I actually, fortunately, was able to cover in detail, and you see that whole new generation of people getting elected. Now, the equivalent of the SIPTU today fought in the 1920 local elections with Sinn Féin. So in Cork you have trade unionists and Sinn Féin on the same platform. And it's the first Republican government kind of in the city. And it leads to McCurtain and McSweeney and all of that. So it's quite profound in terms of the new people that came into politics. And it's a good point you make that Fianna Fáil or the anti-treatyites had an opportunity to feel their way through all of this. What you're getting is really abstentionism is sterile and is not working, is having no impact, and you have things like boundary commissions and so on coming along. And the difference, I think, in terms of Fianna Fáil and Cumann na Gael, and the book next week alludes to a bit of this as well on Thursday, on James Ryan, is that Fianna Fáil is actually creating a programme around agriculture, so land annuities, for example, which appeals to a lot of the farming, small farmers in particular across the country, industrialisation in tons. So protectionism is a big issue. So protectionism versus free trade is a big issue in the 20s. Some of Cumann na Gael leave Cumann na Gael. So J.J. Walsh, who was the founder of the radio station, right, chairman of Cork County Board in the 1918 period, was in the GPO, gets 20,000 votes in Cork in those elections. And then by 27 or 30, he's gone. He's kind of saying, I'm getting out of this free trade coalition. And he sends a telegram from Lucerne of all places to say he's getting out of politics. But a lot of that protectionist element of Irish Ireland would go and join Fianna Fáil and support Fianna Fáil. The Dowdalls are margarine manufacturers. One of them was made a senator by W.T. Cosgrave in the Cumann na Gael government. Once De Valera gets into the Dáil, takes the oath of allegiance, the Dowdalls are on the Fianna Fáil platform in Patrick Street in Cork. So you see the shifting sands almost at a local level. So the party's programme is bringing people with them. The propaganda was still fairly brutal. I mean, some of the election posters were, particularly after the empty formula, there's kind of, I mean, they're quite, I mean, you have to say they're very impactful stuff. We could do with some of it today in terms of our electioneering, in terms of the innovation. But there's posters of, you have Collins RIP, Griffith RIP, Sean Hales RIP, all the dead of the Civil War, and then the slogan, this is from Cumann na Gael, all for an empty formula, And so it's hard and tough stuff. But the Fianna Fáil stuff then, if you look at what De Valera and them are doing in 27, they're talking about economics. And they're sort of speaking, and this is what I think the author next week argues is that, and I would read, Cumann na nGaedheal are still fixated on the split. Fianna Fáil are saying, actually, we're going to get rid of land annuities. We're going to have tariffs to develop local native industries. They're holding agricultural conferences. They're holding trade union conferences. And they have a very active socio-economic platform. If you look at the elections of 27s and 32, like, it is striking, actually, the degree to which economic platform and policy speeches really outweigh very significantly the constitutional piece. So, and that gets lost in some of the narrative around that period. And it's very striking, that platform. And I think that is a factor in terms of the success of the party. And it also attracts in people who, a lot of were former volunteers and that, but Hugo Flynn and others like that are from a business background. They're coming into the scene as well. Sorry if I deviated a bit.
This is what it's all about. And I think, I mean, one of the striking anecdotes for me around the foundation time of the party is after De Valera lost the vote here in the Rotunda, he confides in Lamass that he's going to leave public life, he's going to walk away from it all, and Lamass is the one that turns around and convinces him of the need for a new organisation. And you've spoken to some of the motivations behind why the party was founded. But I think I'd love to maybe explore a bit more in terms of, as we think of a political system, and as a political scientist, the first thing you do is you think of where do parties slot in. What gaps in the party system existed at that time that Fianna Fáil filled, Professor Dolan? What do you think? We had a Labour Party, we had an Cumann na nGaedheal, which was for all intents and purposes fulfilling the role of a Christian democratic party that was being formed on the continent at that time. But Fianna Fáil was different in terms of its new approach, was it?
Yeah, I suppose you're looking at, if you look at sort of some of the people who would have gone Cumann na nGaedheal in 23, a lot of the constituencies along the Western Seaboard, they were hoping for a Land Act in 23. They're deeply disappointed by it. So who are they going to vote for? It's back to your point about the emphasis on land. You're thinking about the old age pensioners who've had their pension reduced. Who are they going to vote for? So therefore, you've got them. You're thinking about, where is employment going to come from? The degree to which protectionism is becoming the norm through most of the world. And I think on the one hand, we see this as an Irish Ireland, a protectionist instinct, the De Valera's Ireland, closing ourselves in from the world that he's been portrayed as in the literature for a long time. But in many respects, you couldn't be more international in your instincts towards protectionism. We're quite late to it. I mean, I think oddly, Joe Lee wrote about this many decades ago now, the degree to which it's bringing people under its umbrella according to traditional political science, you shouldn't have some of these people actually wanting to vote for the same party. So you're talking about small farmers, agricultural labourers, the urban poor, those who want new industries created, those who want, if you like, or have a sense that things haven't changed enough in the 10 years. And I think on the other hand, you can go to the other extreme and argue as some have from the 60s onwards that this was, if you like, a revolution without a social revolution. But I think it depends what your expectations of a social revolution was. And I think it's interesting if you read, and again, it's tricky because of when he wrote this and how it's been used since. But say, if you look at Todd Andrews' memoir from 1979, I think it's Dublin Made Me. And he talks about this idea of seeing this new political party as a place for, I think he described it as, we were the children of unimportant people. And there's something incredibly powerful about that as a message and as a mobilisation, as a way to mobilise people. That sense that this is about something that isn't about who you're connected to, this sense of entitlement or privilege that you're coming to politics with. And then it's really interesting to look at Lamass in this period. I think Lamass is much more interesting in this period than he is in the 1950s, but I would say that because this is my period. But when you look...
I think the lesson of Lamass is the capacity to change.
Yes.
Yeah. So he's a protectionist in the 30s and he's a free trade advocate in the 60s.
Yeah.
And that's a very important message. We should never be afraid of the need to change.
But the degree to which he was looking to, I think even before they've left Sinn Féin, the degree to which he's already looking at Australian Labour Party, economic policy... when he does get into government, the things he's suggesting, the things that the Department of Finance won't let him do are incredibly interesting. Things like the Shops Act, things like the conditions of employment. These are, when you look at, he's giving holidays with pay around the same year this was brought in France. It's 2 years later that this was brought in the UK. So the degree to which I think that we take for granted, or it's too easy for us to criticise looking back, that some of these measures didn't go far enough. When you think of the economic hardships of the post-Wall Street crash, we're in a post-Wall Street crash world. I think for too long we've looked at this purely as an Anglo-Irish relationship. Yeah. This is an economic war. This is about Britain and Ireland again. And it's, in a way, it tells us a lot about how the degree to which we have framed the history of that early part of independence through that Civil War lens. But the degree to which this is about, you're in a global economic depression.
Yes.
Now, admittedly, the state is having to react to that. So to what extent are some of these policies driven by the difficulties, the economic difficulties this place is in? I mean, you have to again, talks about the last lot could count on 25 or 30,000 people a year leaving the state. We can't do that. We have to do something about to cope with that. And, that in and of itself is striking. And equally, you get a rise in the population in one of the first census after Fianna Fáil got into government. And this sense publicly, this is a celebration of our achievement. This is a celebration of independence. Privately, there's what do we do? How do we cope with this? This is more people who have to be catered for. How do we deal with the economic reality of that? So there's the push and pull. There's the sense in which things are getting done, but are they also getting done because we're in a greater period of economic difficulty and demand? You're getting, yes, children in schools are getting free milk, but that's because the milk, you have an excess of milk. So there's the push and pull. But I suppose the other thing to think about as well is the degree to which they are looking at the outside world. This idea of a closed off Ireland, I think, for me, doesn't wash. Didn't wash in the 20s, doesn't wash into the 30s either. And
Taoiseach, that internationalist outlook, I mean, that was something that David Ahern embraced, I think, all through his time. I mean, as an aside, it's important to remember that Lamass taught himself economics when he was in prison, and he wasn't expected to be as forward-thinking as. But talk to me maybe about that internationalist outlook that the party had from its foundation, about how it thought about the world, how it thought about Ireland's place in the world, and how it defined that relationship with other countries.
Well, I think what's fundamental is, I think, from the proclamation on, and even before that, but the Republican was an internationalist. The nationalism was internationalist. It wasn't inward-looking, it was outward-looking. Our allies in Europe. In fact, if you go prior to 1916, go back to Tone and all, go back to O'Connell, prior to the famine, Ireland was a European. Was very engaged in the European mainstream in many aspects. But anyway, De Valera was very internationalist. And the whole effort from 22, both by Common Ireland, a free state, and subsequently by Fianna Fáil, was to assert the sovereignty of the country, to break away from the imperial sort of hold, if you like. And David McCullough's book actually goes through that very well in minute detail. And then De Valera's, I think, performance at the League of Nations was extremely strong. And he became a well-recognised global leader himself, well-respected, and, of course, hugely popular in the US, extraordinary crowds. But I always think his speeches at the League of Nations are very pertinent. He's more or less predicting a lot of what he said prior to World War II. You could nearly say it again now, in terms of the breakdown of the international order, rules-based order, world plummeting into difficulty and challenges. So building relationships was always very important. And then you move on, and you can see Sean Lamass was very impatient. He's saying we need to get out there. We need to be part of the common market. We need to start getting rid of tariffs even before we join the common market to get fit for the common market. And so we were always internationalist in outlook. There's some tremendous stories told in terms of the early years and people trying to find their feet. The envoys we had during the revolutionary period, and there's a book recently edited by the late Dermot Keogh and others, which go through, we had people in Genoa, we had people all over Europe during the revolutionary period and subsequently. I mean, De Valera and the Constitution has to neutralise the Vatican because McQuaid isn't happy with the Church of Ireland being mentioned as the Church of Ireland in the Constitution. So Hagan is director of the Irish College. He's De Valera. He's kind of on the anti-treaty side and supporter of De Valera. And De Valera uses him to get to the Pope first before McQuaid's envoy gets there to say, look, whatever you say silent on the Irish Constitution. Yeah. It's grand, it'll do fine or whatever. And there's this kind of diplomacy going on all of the time. And it's fascinating to see that they were very proactive in the idea that we're not just an inward-looking sort of nationalism. We're very much wanted to take our part in the world. And like in my office, I have De Valera and Collins and so on, but also our first emissary to the United States, Harry Boland, whose job was to try and get recognition. So that idea of getting recognition of the new country and then being part of the international thing.
And people forget that the momentum to gain recognition in the United States, the campaign to get recognition in the United States, it got great momentum in terms of huge momentum, and that ultimately congressionally it could have happened. I want to go to a thing that I've always enjoyed about the story of the party, which is the name. And Fianna Fáil, the Republican Party, and people will be familiar with the fact that De Valera wanted Fianna Fáil as the sort of the hark back to the Fianna of Inish Fáil, and Lemass was very keen on the Republican Party, and ultimately it was a compromise. And Fianna Fáil, the Republican Party, is the name that we have still. And TJ, I'm struck by a lot of what Professor Dolan about the people who supported Fianna Fáil, that we couldn't place them as a political scientist. You can't place them in the support profile. How do you think that republicanism manifested itself then, and how it connected with those people?
So I was going to go back. If you look at the 2022 election, Labour did quite well in that. And I wondered, Labour could have grown further, actually. And I think Fianna Fáil captured the working class vote and through tariffs and protectionism. I think was a factor in that. I mean, it was huge in Cork. It was just, and there was an Irish Ireland movement. There was a newspaper created around this. All the academics in UCC and all of them were all behind this movement. And Cumann Gael isn't doing it for them. Alfred O'Reilly gets disillusioned. He wrote the Free State Constitution. He's now moving over, kind of thing. And so you get all of that happening at the time. So, as I said, nothing was inevitable here. But I think they did capture that work, and in many ways stop Labour from becoming what you might have said in the European sense would have been, or UK sense, the emergence of a Labour movement. Fianna Fáil in many ways captured that space. But at the same time, ingeniously then, having the rural small farmer and Labour particularly on board through specific policies. Electorally, it was an incredible machine. The policies were well focused to various categories of the electorate, and then the organisation structure. And then the other key things in forming a political party and developing a political party, apart from the policy frame, you need three things. You need communications, you need an organisational structure, and you need money. So De Valera, to his credit, you had a national collection, which became the first mass, Bar O'Connell's stuff with the thing, but it became a very fundamental fundraising. You had the Irish press being formed, incredibly successful, and you had the coming across the land to better the country. This is pre-television era, pre-broadcast. And those three dimensions, they got very right. And then obviously you overlay that with the policy and the philosophy. Sorry for going.
And then I guess Professor Dolan, just to touch on what the Taoiseach said there, it was an era of mass political parties being formed in Europe right across the piece, mostly social democratic, mostly based on unions. Were there particular characteristics of Fianna Fáil's approach to organisation that's made it stand apart? I mean, I've often heard people describe the fact that it used a military-type structure nearly in terms of how it approached setting up the organisation. What would your thoughts be on that?
Yeah, I mean, the assumption is they use sort of old IRA networks. They built from parish out. I mean, I think there's an argument made as a sort of almost like it's the political GAA, the sense of building from the parish, build from the grassroots, give that sense of involvement, connection. And that's why the project that you're talking about with Ogre going out in collecting that sort of memory of that. Because it's grand for me to go into the archives and see what Sean Lemass had to say, or you know, De Valera, or whoever else's papers I can get my hands on. But to some extent, I think one of the places we're really lacking is this sense of what was it like to be a member of a political party in the period. Why did people join? What was it that drove you into one political party over another? Yeah. And to some extent, you look at it and see there's constant activity. It is a movement more than a political party, because you look at the same time at Cumann Gael, and Richard Mulcahy is talking about, I think from about 24 on, this is, let's dial down this party thing, because really this is a bit of a nuisance. We only really want you at election time, and this criticism within the grassroots Cumann Gael party is really strong. They don't listen to us. Yeah. Why don't they listen to us? There's a bit of a heave in October 24 about that discontent in the wider party. But that sense in which, and it's there from the outset, how do you build this organisation? The fact that you, from the beginning, you've 2 paid organisers in head office, basically watching around the country going, well, using the national collection, they haven't contributed as much this year. Get a couple of speakers down there. So it's a way to monitor activity.
You're giving the guys at headquarters new ideas now, you know that?
Yeah, well, maybe ideas they've forgotten, but it was definitely there from the start. That, if you see a fall or a dip in the national collection, you send people. Yeah. You send a big name down there to speak, so... That would be an in-demand job, yeah. Reacting to that information and acting on it. I mean, I think it would be really interesting to look at. I was very struck. I think it was Tras Honan was interviewed, and it was a piece of footage, and it was used in the Seven Ages documentary back in 2000. Yeah. And she talks about, I couldn't have married anyone who wasn't Fianna Fáil. And I think there's that sense of thinking about the social life of political organisations and political movements. What do they tell us about how people, live their lives, how they act on a day-to-day basis? They choose to spend their spare time going to whist drives and dances and all of these different things. And you can see, even if you just look at a local newspaper, the degree to which a Cumann Gael dance is a certain price to get in, a Fianna Fáil dance is a much lower price to get in. And this sense of, and I think it's a word we don't use enough when we think about political activism in the period, is class. And I think you're right about it. They do steal Labour's clothes. There is this sense. I mean, De Valera mentions James Connolly, I think, in one of the early Fianna Fáil, the launch speeches of the party. So he's trying to steal the clothes from the get-go. But I think it's even striking, is when they introduced the widows and orphans pensions in 35. There's some sort of to and fro in the Dáil as the bill has been debated and from Labour. And I think it's either Sean T. O'Kelly or Sean McEntee gets up and says the Labour Party has as little to do with this as the King of Bulgaria. It was something about the King of Bulgaria in the news at the time. But this sense of, we're effectively doing the things you should be advocating for.
I think the Cumann Gael, if you read the National Executive of Cumann Gael, they're fascinating in terms of how not to run a political party. And I don't mean that in a negative way. It's just that, Cumann Gael is kind of a coalition. To be fair, they've got to get the treaty. They have to build a country, to be honest, to blunt. And you have a coalition of those who want to stay stable economy, settle things down, get things moving. So you have many in business are saying, look, we need to get going again. You have the remnants of the old Irish Parliamentary Party. You have Irish Ireland wing of the pro-treaty. It's the Michael Collins kind of Irish Ireland element, who get disillusioned, by the way, as the 20s go on. But if fairness, Blythe, at the National Executives, basically, if members complain and give out, Blythe will tell them, how dare you give out? We're working very hard here. Your job is to sell everything we do. And that was kind of it. There was no real engagement in terms of saying you're making a fair point or whatever. It was just really categoric. Stop moaning. Your job is to go out there and win votes. And it was just, I know some of you out there are saying, when you take it on board yourself. But that genuinely was the National Executive of Cumann Gael. And you could see the problems building. There's a great memo from Ono Duffy as Commissioner of An Garda Síochána. And he's basically really brassed off because I think they ought to cut the Garda pay or whatever. And he writes a great memo saying, all I've done for you guys, in election time I made sure the cars that you hired, the Cumann Gael cars were, or the petrol that your cars were Cumann Gael, that the Gardaí used, were Cumann Gael stations. I made sure that the polling stations were well manned. I mean, it's a good old treatise for how, in the early part of any modern state, you're on the border of, but definitely he's then brassed off because what do you guys go? You go in and cut our pay. Yeah. So there's this kind of sense they're not actually electorally focused on supporting their base enough to get the enthusiasm. And you can get you could get the treaty stuff at 27. You could get through the Civil War, use that. You don't want that crowd in. They're a bunch of commies, and they did call Fianna Fáil communists and. That communists are voting Fianna Fáil and all that kind of stuff. That wore thin. It's the old Reds under the beds later on in future decades. It doesn't work. Yeah. And it didn't work. And it needed more imaginative sort of approach.
I think it's even back to your point earlier about the propaganda. I mean, if you look at it, I think the 32 election, they outspend Fianna Fáil something like 2-1. beautiful posters, but they don't work. The message is so negative. And again, I think it's really interesting to look at, as you said earlier, the Fianna Fáil posters, and the election material is incredibly positive. It's all about policy. But if you look at the front page of the Irish press, the cartoon is often incredibly negative. We're coming against. So that hand in hand, if you like, use of the press with the party is very, very striking in terms of how to win an election on it without spending the money.
And people ultimately respond to positive messaging in a campaign. I mean, we're here to launch the Centenary Programme, 100 years of the party. I mean, Professor Dolan, from a historical point of view, what's the significance for any political party to reach a milestone like this, to say that we've been 100 years in existence?
It's very difficult. I mean, we've come through the centenary with lots of things in the last few years, and I think one of the things I'm struck by is the degree to which it's now actually very hard to get students to show an interest in some of that stuff that's been dealt with. And centenaries can be incredibly helpful at the time, but it's actually very hard to mobilise interest as the time goes on, and the sense in which things have been said and done. But it is a very significant milestone, but it does raise questions about, if you like, how do you move forward from this? How do you face the next 100 years with the challenges that we currently face for democracies, for Western democracies? I mean, I think at the moment, if you think in terms of, and again, I should probably say that, you know, like my long-term colleague Dave Fitzpatrick said, like, as historians, we're good with the past, we're not good at the future. We're historians for a reason, so I'll caveat it with that. But there's a sense in which, how do you communicate that kind of politics now, in a time when traditional media is changing? It's instant. It has to be memeable. It has to be extreme to get attention. I mean, if you look at the UK at the moment, I'm really struck by, what is it, the Reform Party have 5 MPs at the moment, but they get far more media attention than the Liberal Democrats, who have, I think, 75 MPs. So how do you get a message across in a world that's changing like that? How do you keep that grassroots mobilisation functioning? How do you make that work? What do you do when democracy is incredibly fragile? And it was fragile in the time that we've been talking about today, very much so. And I think that we can't ignore the fact that, yes, there was a Red Scare, because for some people they still saw that relationship between Fianna Fáil and the IRA as a dangerous one. They saw De Valera as a front for something he couldn't control.
The police were shadowing the mass in the late 20s. And the mass did call into the Communist Party headquarters, according to one police report anyway. But we knew some of the lads anyway, and I was having a chat. But of course they took all sorts of, you know. I just think on that, like, you're right in one way because social media, but on the other way, like, you draw inspiration from the 30s in the sense, I think our constitution is probably one of the most misrepresented constitutions in subsequent narrative, because actually fascism is on the rise in Europe in the 1930s, you know, all over Europe. And in the middle of all of that, we produce a constitution that, in terms of its fundamental pillars, is a textbook in terms of freedom of speech, freedom of movement, etc., and all of that, separation of powers, judicial interpretation, which limits the power of the Oireachtas. Like, it basically puts a brake on what the government or the parliament can do. We should, in the midst of what must have been a fairly depressing international scene, and De Valera's writing or speaking in the League of Nations about how perilous things are globally, we still produce a constitution that's a beacon for its time. It needed amendment, but he creates the mechanism for change through a referendum process and so on like that. And it's a living document because the courts interpret it on an ongoing basis. Like that, we should try and draw some inspiration for that, notwithstanding all the gloom at the moment around where the world is going. And there is, I mean, I was in Cambridge at the weekend. We're establishing a chair of Irish history, and it's named after the Childers, Erskine Childers and Erskine Hamilton Childers, who do deserve recognition as well for their contribution to the formation of the state and the development of the state. But I was struck by the number of students there and historians who were very, very worried about the suppression of academic freedoms in the world, lack of autonomy in universities. I was quite struck by the numbers who came up afterwards and said, thanks for your contribution. We are very worried about where we're going in terms of all of this. So the idea of the university, for example, and the freedom of the campus of the university, we have to nurture all of that. The issue is communications. I'm not clear we have all the answers on the communication channels of the current world or the future.
And I suppose when you reference Bunnorth na Éireann there, Taoiseach, one of the often unjustified criticisms is that Ireland inherited its political traditions from the UK, but actually if you look at a lot of the hallmarks of the Constitution, the role of the courts, the role of the referendum in amending the Constitution, they weren't inherited from the British tradition at all. In fact, they were inspired by European Liberal Democrat. Could make hesh start to Gaeilge mas féidir a hiisig ile cerdid na buach fuinte a hiasan mach ditche Thresh Cade Blian than 40 of Aaron Fode. Cerdin the Ruddy Mora a Yasan Mach Ditcha with us a Harva Broad the Lastu. I will Curry Greek Fianna Fáil.
Well, gan hours on Bunrocht na Éireann sin came on a hawk to Carfad. Dot a shock of the into sort of the more room should go of Chunaker File egg on Europe course Gallagher na Tira. Go harde as na shock to the amach. Vi dakker dus vi duchlein own. Ach diger nieg vi Chunaker File egg on Europe Forbert na Tira. Agus an part a cloch an 40 mar dort me son a ride three kunre ina an geste agus for egen a stoppe douchegart na Heerden again on role agus an job again Albert Reynolds go haide Charles Haughey River agus Bertie Hearn
yes
Conra ina an geste wintermak an gloene town fil an gloen og fil laher better ni higen sheet kecho inspirada ka vi sin mar ni emohorum sin ni Vies oudersak kan meg Sheikhan going in Echer some tearsham or vies own geestelijk een radio agus vi fekent een televisie dinig file was ik toen varu gach in labjog nach agus shin stok rod anhocht bunnemer amach agus an dolkon keen so shilte agus ach na mechte na tiere vi Fianna Fáil tef hier den anaquide harle o he fjunterde agus corsi chancellor.
And that I think speaks to that point that Taoiseach made there about the generation in Northern Ireland now at the moment maybe not having that same lived memory of the violence that existed there. I mean, that speaks in a way to what you mentioned about the commemorations, Professor Dolan, that it's difficult to mobilise people on that as well. So I guess as we look forward to the next 100 years, I think we all imagine we are hopefully going to be here another 100 years as a party. You mentioned a lot of the challenges that exist in the world right now. What do you see as the challenges for this political party as it embarks upon its second centenary? Or second century of existence?
I suppose what I was struck by, there's a document, and I think it was, I'll go backwards first. There was a document in 48, I think in preparation for the 48 election. And it was basically, what have we achieved? And there was about 9 or 10, 11 things under about 4 or 5 different headings. And here's what we've done. And there was a sense in 48, it was almost felt like it was coming a gale in 32 a little. There was a sense of, look at all we've done. Yeah. And thinking about, look, we've done all these great things. And there's a sense in which I think from 32 well into the 30s, there's that sense of, there's a very clear message of what the party was about. This is what we want to achieve. Lemass was saying this from 24, 25. We have to show that we are capable of doing things and doing them quickly, and they have to make a practical difference to people's lives and how they live. And I suppose in a way it's about how do you keep a message that is clear, that is about the future, is about what role do we play in your life on a day-to-day basis. Because it's back to what I said earlier about Todd Andrews, the sense of we're the playing people of Ireland. And of course you can question how much he romanticised that idea. But this idea that we're a party that functions for you, that will make a practical difference in your life. It's back to the Jolie thing, that almost in government, this was a party that managed to be, as he called it, again the government, even though you were the government in the 30s. But it's very hard to keep.
It's a good dynamic.
It is, but how do you keep that going?
Yeah.
when you've actually been in government
Yeah.
for most of
Yeah.
your first 100 years.
I think when you look, when you go that long period,
Yeah.
32, 40, like you're going to get stayed.
Yeah, your role
yeah.
has shifted.
And there's no question about that. That happens
Yeah.
in politics. But
Yeah.
you got to keep re-energizing.
Yeah.
Like I think the Mass is a great example of that in terms of when I said earlier about the 30s protectionist. He's outward looking. The 50s, 60s, late 50s, 60s. You got to have that orientation to the future, and you'd be very good at politics, Anne, because you've summed it up there. When you don't think you would be, but the minute you just did a mental switch in my head there when you said the minute you're talking about your achievements, you're in a bit of trouble.
Yeah.
Because the public always are looking forward, and they're always looking what's the next, and what you do is fair enough. It's good, but it's pocketed a bit and so on like that.
Yeah.
And also then there's people in the modern era, I think. And this is where I think in Britain, it's where it's shaping up, and I'm not going to get involved in British politics, but there's the divide in the modern era so far, in this current era, is between those who the public have a sense will actually govern with a degree of common sense, purpose, rationale, and are those who just want to kind of potentially become very disruptive or tear things down. It's reform versus, like there's about 50% in the UK, I reckon, are centre back to left, who never liked the Brexit thing anyway. And instead of chasing reform into their territory where you won't get a vote, maybe you're better harnessing that 50%. In the last general election, it was 50% plus in this country wanted a certain, and that spread between parties and independents. And I think the future is somewhere in that mix unless things settle down internationally. The one concern I have is that the politics is very fragmented. The electoral system we have, which was always designed to create fragmentation, like multi-seat electoral systems create fragmentation. Ireland was an outlier for the first 50, 60 years in that we had 2.5 party system. Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael and Labour. That's changed. You've very fragmented Dáil, lots of independence. It makes decision making more difficult. And that old argument that Fianna Fáil used, we need a majority government to get things done. A majority government is a long way off, but at the same time, you do need a strong government to get things done and a coherent government to get things done. That will be the challenges of the future in the electoral system that we have.
And we were one of the first countries in the world where PRSV was used. It was designed by a mathematician for use here. This is the first podcast I've moderated, Taoiseach, and I'm told that I'm required to fire a zinger question to try and sum it up. So I'm going to leave the last question with you. As party leader, what do you think are the biggest questions facing the party now in terms of its next 100 years? What are the things it really needs to grapple with to ensure that it remains true to those founding principles you spoke about earlier on?
Internally, it needs to be more ambitious. Every single TD and senator needs to be ambitious. I want 2 seats in my constituency. I leave out Kilkenny, Carlow, because they have 3. But that is a big challenge, The early years, it's interesting, you look at the Kerry posters last week, they just had 6 or 7 names up there. Vote Fianna Fáil. Or that was Portlaoise, Sean, wasn't it? Laois, same thing. Vote Fianna Fáil in order of your choice. And they list all the candidates. But the trick is that, it's not trick, it's the focus, it's the ambition. It can't be, there's a very good candidate has arrived on my doorstep, and how do I kill that candidate, electorally speaking? Yeah, I'm not saying that happens, but it
doesn't happen.
But no, I'm just saying that is the big challenge, because it's very, very competitive out there. We have shown in some constituencies where it can be done and how it can be done. That's an internal political organisational challenge. I think the other challenge is, when I mentioned the 3 pillars, I think on the communication side we have a big challenge as well. How do we navigate the modern communication framework? How do we create an Irish press type pillar that De Valera created in an online environment where communication is all over the place, so to speak, where you have not that. That's it. And then on the policy framework, I think we have to keep that internationalist, outward, enterprise development focused party that wants to get things done. That matters. And also having that very strong core equality of opportunity spirit that has been manifested in our education focus down through the decades. I mean, we are the party of Irish education. I make no apology for saying that. We get it, and I think maybe romantically saying it, that education piece in Fianna Fáil speaks to the Palanders bit, speaks to the idea that every child deserves a chance in life, because we were the people but we are the sons and daughters of unimportant people. And that sense is always within us. And our parents wanted us to get an education. I'm a child of the O'Malley revolution, so that's something I hold very dear. But to me, that's something Fianna Fáil can't lose, that social dimension, that sense of every child deserves the best. And we have huge challenges there, which we have to work extremely hard to achieve.
Okay, thank you very much, Taoiseach. And there we have it, recorded the first episode of our Blian podcast, recorded with you live this evening. Lots of food for thought given by both our panellists, Taoiseach and Professor Anne Dolan. Thank you both for your insight and for your time. I hope it was an interesting and useful experience for you. It will be released on Friday, and we will have a series of these around the country, both as podcasts, but we also hope in front of live studio audiences in centres around the country as well. So I hope to see you as many of as you can there. I understand there's a drinks reception. It must be a big deal. A drinks reception available to us after this event. So please do hang around. I'd love to hear about ideas that you're having in your constituencies to commemorate our Nairacht, our Dauki. Thank you for your time. Thank you for making the time to be here. Agus today, Come on.